the phone there, as we say, and we'll put this live on YouTube. And Jonathan, your microphone's on, but it's probably supposed to be on. And it's very, very, very exciting to have you, Aryae. It's really a big honor and a pleasure. And I'm so happy that you are able to join us here today. So just getting this set up for Zoom on Facebook. Hold on. This is just like having a doctor's exam and they're like, hold on. Okay, we're doing it. We're live.
Okay.
I don't know why that has any sound.
This is just like
okay, I don't know why it's giving me sound and it's confusing me. So I turned off my speaker so you don't hear the sound in the background. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jonathan, for this interview. Welcome, everyone. This is another installment of our ongoing series, Roots of Renewal, with the Rishonim, the core people who were there, Maseh Bereshis, in the beginning of the Jewish Renewal movement. We're so lucky, Ashrenu, that we have Reb Aryae Coopersmith with us, who is one of the most foundational people that we can ever even think of. I'm going to make myself quiet and let Jonathan and Dan do all the interviewing, and I'll be handling the tech in the background. So again, thank you, Aryae, so much for being with us.
Okay, Bruchim Habayim, everybody. Thank you, Lorelei. Let's just take a moment to pray for peace right now in Israel. Just take a moment. Yeh ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elovoteinu shetitein shalom al haaretz v'kol hamizrach hatichon hashta ba'agala v'zman kariv v'nomar amen.
Amen.
May God give us peace on this earth, especially in the Holy Land right now, in a tense and difficult time. We ask this in your name, B'Shem Hashem. Ken Yeh ratzon. So, welcome, my dear friend Aryae, Reb Aryae, one of the Rishonim of the Jewish Renewal movement on the West Coast. I'm delighted you're here. This will be an organized, chaotic process today. In other words, it's going to have strict organization to honor us that are more Yekish, and a little chaos to honor those of us that are more Hasidish. So it's both. And that's part of me and a lot of us. We have a Yekish and very misnagid side and a Hasidish side. I'd like to start off with a question about your education and background in Judaism and how you came to the Bay Area in the 60s and how you came to found the House of Love and Prayer with your friends.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Yonatan. I can relate to the Yeki side and the Hasidish side very much. And it's wonderful to see old friends showing up. And really honored to be here with everyone from the Aquarian Minyan. Well, you know, my Jewish background, I'd had a couple of uncles who died in the Second World War. One was in a concentration camp. One was fighting in the American Army at Battle of the Bulge. And, you know, like a lot of people in my generation, there was sort of this shadow in the background as I was growing up of the Holocaust and everything around, but nobody talked about it. My parents seemed to have an agreement with all their friends that we don't talk about all that bad stuff. We're just looking forward to making it in America. And I went to a Hebrew school at a conservative shul. And the basic value, which was not explicit, but which was clear to all of us 10-year-olds, was number one, we're proud to be Jewish. Number two, don't be too Jewish. Number three, the main thing right now is sports, business, and succeeding in America. So I did my duty to God and my country. I got bar mitzvahed. I chanted all the stuff I was supposed to chant. Didn't have a clue what any of it meant. I collected all the bar mitzvah presents that evening. And that was the last time I set foot in a shul for about 10 years. I wound up in San Francisco in the early 60s. I had dropped out of college. It wasn't my thing at that time. I stuck out my thumb, few weeks later, I was driving in somebody's pickup truck across the Bay Bridge into San Francisco, 1963. Dig it, San Francisco, 1963. It was really a fun place. I got off the pickup truck, looked around me and said, wow, I'm not in Jersey anymore. I wound up living in the least expensive place I could, which was the Fillmore area, which at that time was totally African-American. So I rented a house with 2 other white kids who were going to San Francisco State College. We were the only white guys on the block. And I wound up hanging out with the civil rights movement in San Francisco at that time, going out on demonstrations, sitting in, spent a little time in jail, was very proud of being in jail. Meanwhile, my grandfather in the Bronx was very concerned. And he was wondering how he was going to make a Jew out of me. So he sends me a letter. It says, Aryae, how would you like to go to an exotic part of the world overseas and see new people and new places? And I write back, sure, Grandpa, what is it? He says, Israel, you can enroll in the Hebrew University. So anyway, I wound up saying, hey, why not? So I wound up in the Hebrew University, didn't speak a word of Hebrew, so I had to sit in an old pond for 12 hours a day and learn how to speak Hebrew so I could go to my classes. Somehow managed that. The people I wound up hanging out with were people from Morocco and Australia and South Africa. And what we did is we smoked hashish and made music. But I could do it all in Hebrew, you know, so it was pretty good. I wound up with a young woman who was Israeli, and her dream was to go to the States and dance with Martha Graham. Her name was Ruti. So Ruti and I wound up going back to the States together. And it's during the Vietnam War. I'd registered to be a conscientious objector. I didn't believe in the Vietnam War. So they asked me some questions. They say, you're Jewish, right? The Jews aren't conscientious objectors. How can we list you as a conscientious objector? You're not a Quaker. No, I'm not a Quaker. So that was one of the issues I had to deal with. Wound up going to San Francisco State College, and I needed a nice, inexpensive neighborhood to live in. So I wound up in this place called the Haight-Ashbury that I knew nothing about. Meanwhile, I see everybody's walking around with tie-dyed T-shirts, and they're smoking their joints, and they're all stoned. And I'm trying to attend class every day. And one time I'm on my way to class, and I see this guy with a yarmulke and a beard and a guitar, and everybody's dancing. And I asked somebody, who's that? He said, oh, he's the singing rabbi. I say, the singing rabbi? I've heard of the singing nun, but I never heard of the singing rabbi. Anyway, before I knew it, somebody grabbed me. We're dancing around in the circle. There's hundreds of us, 19, 20, 21-year-olds at San Francisco State College, and we're all dancing. And the singing rabbi just keeps going and going and going and going. So finally, after a few hours, we're like all wiped out. We're standing there. And, you know, it was a very mixed crowd. It was white kids and African-American and Asian and Christian and Jewish and everybody. We're all standing around with our arms around each other. And suddenly I got this very weird feeling. It was like I was on acid. I couldn't tell where my body ended and the next person's body began. We were just all one. Meanwhile, the singing rabbi is saying, you know, our holy master, the founder of Hasidism, the holy Baal Shem Tov, used to say that if everybody in the world would hold hands, the hands would reach to heaven. And I realized, oh my God, he's talking about what I'm experiencing. And then he looks right at me, right? You know, those of you who've been to Shlomo concerts, you know, at certain points, he's looking right at you. So I say, okay, maybe I don't need to hang out with Yogi Bhajan and Swami Bhaktivedanta and all these other folks to experience this state of oneness. Maybe somehow it's in my own tradition. Maybe my grandparents knew about this stuff. So I was hooked.
Wow, 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 wow. So you got the house, you were hooked, and you wanted to create a center of Kedusha to emulate this feeling of oneness, to bring people to Shlomo? Or did Shlomo catalyze the beginning of the house? Was it out of your heart? What was the impulse or the catalyst to create the house?
Well, I didn't know from Kedusha in those days, although I think that's a pretty good, a pretty good description.
Yeah.
So a bunch of us wound up hanging out with Shlomo. He was very famous in those days. He was traveling around the world. He was doing concerts everywhere. It was pretty exciting, and I could play a little guitar. And so a few of us could also play a little guitar. When Shlomo was in California, we would go travel with him. I would cut class and spend a week out, you know, out doing concerts. So one time we were walking, it was the summer of love. It was the summer of 67. We're on Haight Street, and a few of us are walking down Haight Street with Shlomo. And if any of you were on Haight Street in 67, you know that there were buses coming from all over the country and young hippie kids who wanted to be part of the scene, or who thought they wanted to be hippies, you know, would dress up in what they thought was a hippie outfit. They'd jump on a Greyhound bus and they'd wind up on Haight Street. So there we are with Shlomo. Shlomo, it seems, is running up and hugging every young person he can. And we're just hanging out with him. And everybody he hugged, he would say, hey, you got to spend Shabbos with us. And who was it? It was Elia and Miriam Sukkot, who had a 1-bedroom house in Forest Knolls. So I'd say, oh, just go to Elia and Miriam's. You know, and within the last hour, he's invited like 50 people to go to Elia and Miriam's 1-bedroom place and spend the weekend. Libby, it looks like you, you remember all that. So I thought it wasn't fair to them. You know, they had a little kid, they were just trying to kind of live. So I said to Shlomo, it's not really fair, is it, to invite them all to Elia and Miriam's? So Shlomo thinks about that and he says to the chevra, those of us on Haight Street, you know, our brother Aryae is right. We should have a house in San Francisco, a house of Shabbos, and we'll invite everybody in the whole world to our house in San Francisco. And, you know, we're looking at him, well, what would you call it, Shlomo? He says, if I called it Temple Beth Israel, no one would show up. Let's call it the House of Love and Prayer. You know, he just makes this up on the spot. And we're all, wow, that's cool, a house of love and prayer. Well, what is a house of love and prayer? And he says, a house of love and prayer is when you walk in, someone loves you. And when you walk out, someone misses you. And, you know, that stayed with us. We didn't know much about Torah. We didn't know too much about halacha or anything, but we could remember that when someone walks in, when you walk in, someone loves you. When you walk out, someone misses you. And that became our guiding principle, our guiding halacha. Few months later, those of us who are traveling around California with Shlomo doing concerts, we're still traveling, doing concerts everywhere. And after one big concert, and there weren't only Jews that were hanging with us, there were a few Christians who came too. And one of them was a guy who was a student at a Presbyterian seminary. He was sitting at the pool with me the next day after a big concert. We were staying at Shlomo's hotel. And I say to him, you know, Shlomo talked about a house of love and prayer, but there is no house of love and prayer. What are we going to do? And he said, maybe it's not Shlomo's job to start the house of love and prayer. I said, it's not Shlomo's job. Whose job is it? He looks at me and he says, maybe it's your job. Maybe it's my job. How am I going to do it? I don't have any money. He said, I'll give you my life savings. It's a young college student like me. So you give me your life savings. Why are you going to do that? He says, no problem. My parents take care of me. They pay my bills in college. I said, how much is your life savings? He said, $360. So I said, well, all right. So the next day I went on Haight Street. I found the first realtor. I said, I want to rent a house. And they said, what kind of house? And I said, well, I want it to be a really nice big house and with a nice large living room and a few bedrooms. And what do I know? So he takes me into his Cadillac and he drives me across Golden Gate Park up to Arguello Boulevard. And there's this beautiful 3-story Georgian house on Arguello Boulevard. And he said, there were a couple of sisters who spent their lives living here, and the last one of them died at age 93. And we need to rent it out for the estate. I look in the house, it's amazing. And you know, it looks like it's really expensive. So I say, well, it looks beautiful. How much is this house? So he said, well, the rent is $300 a month, but there will be a $60 security deposit. So I say, wow, all right, so let's rent it. So at the time, the young woman I'd come back from Israel, Ruthie, she and I had gotten married, not because we wanted to be married, but she wanted to stay in the US. So I'd agree, okay, I'll marry her. She gets a green card. And anyway, we were living together and we're sort of thinking maybe we really are married after all. So I say, Ruthie, I got this house. I want to move in. She says, no way, you got to move in by yourself. So I packed up some clothes in a duffel bag and took a sleeping bag. That night, I'm sleeping in this big 3-story house all by myself. I give Shlomo a call in New York and tell him we have a house. And he said, you know, Elia and Miriam are here. They're on their way to Israel. But I'll tell them I want them to stay, turn around, come back to San Francisco. And I heard about all this later. You know, they're on their way. They got their kid. They're on their way to Israel. But Shlomo persuades them to spend 1 year in San Francisco. So they turn around, bring all their stuff, come back to San Francisco. And the House of Love and Prayer was open. Shlomo got new business cards. He started passing them out at his concerts around the world. And pretty soon, you know, we'd start having 20, 30, 50, 100 people show up for Shabbos. I didn't know anything about davening or prayers or any of it, but we had to learn pretty quick, and we did.
So thank you. That was great. I have another question about, so you wouldn't label what you were doing back then Jewish Renewal. It was, you were just doing what you were doing. You're with Shlomo, you're getting excited, you're learning Torah. Would you see in any way that this was neo-Hasidish, that it was in the model of Chasids in any way, but in egality, you know, this is blazing a new path, right? women and men together, living collectively in a house, following a Hasidic Rebbe. What kind of Judaism would you describe it now, since it was such an important path-blazing moment in American Jewish history? What do you see it as now, 50 years later? How do you view it? And how did you view it as a 20-year-old?
It's a great question, Rabbi Yonatan. You know, Shlomo was teaching us Hasidus all the time. He would tell us stories from the Ishbitzer. He would tell us stories from the Baal Shem Tov, from Reb Nachman. And kind of the way we were seeing it then was, to be honest, it was a better way to get high. You know, one way to get high is you can do, you can smoke pot, you can take LSD.
Right.
Another way to get high is through prayer, is through Torah, is through singing and dancing. And the way we were sort of starting to understand Hasidus back then at age 20, 22 was, it was about connecting with God through joy, through singing and dancing, through celebrating together. And we would invite everybody to come and sing with us. You know, and there's the story I talk about in my book where there's a guy who comes in who's head of a local Orthodox shul. And, you know, there we are, Shlomo's at the house, and it's men and women, boys, you know, young women, young men, we're singing together. And he says, Rabbi Carlebach, you can't do this. This is not Yiddishkeit. And Shlomo says, he stops, he looks at all of us. There's about 150 of us there, and we're all dressed in our tie-dyed stuff and colorful yarmulkes. And Shlomo says, he brings him in. He says, what's your name? The man says, my name's Irving Solomon. And Shlomo says, I want you to introduce you to the holiest Yid in the world. This is Irving Solomon. And he grabs him, he brings him in. And he says, you know, you're right. You're absolutely right. If we're going to total halacha, this is not right. But he said, imagine if somebody comes into the operating room and they've got a heart attack. And the surgeon comes in and he says, we gotta work on his toenails. What would you say? It's crazy, right? It's got a heart attack. He says, our young people, this generation, spiritually, they're threatened. They don't know anything spiritual. They don't know how to connect with God. They don't know how to connect with our tradition. Maybe at some point we'll have the luxury of time to talk about toenails, but right now we've got to reach directly to their hearts. And he brings in Irving Solomon. Irving Solomon puts his arm around one young woman, one young man, gets in the circle and starts dancing with us. You know, and that's how we saw Hasidus at that point.
Beautiful, beautiful.
You know, if you're asking about renewal, Reb Zalman came about a month later. And Shlomo, and he was teaching at the University of Manitoba at that point. And he says, he calls up Reb Zalman and he says, you know, you got to come to the House of Love and Prayer. There's a bunch of kids there and they need a little help and I can't be there. Can you spend a weekend with them? So Reb Zalman comes and he spends Shabbos with us. And, you know, on the one hand, they were very different. Shlomo was all about stories from the heart.
Right.
And Reb Zalman was talking from the mind. He was talking about how do we understand things? How do we make sense of, you know, when we think about Buddhism and we think about Judaism and we think about native traditions, what do they have in common? He was showing us how there are 4 worlds in the Shabbos morning davening and how that's related to the Catholic Mass. You know, we're all tripping out on all these amazing ideas. And afterwards, I said to Reb Zalman, can you teach us some more? Can you come here more?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, you know, Shlomo is your Rebbe, he says. Don't think of me as a father, think of me as an uncle. but you can always come to me every once in a while.
Mm,
So we began to understand that there was Shlomo's way and there was Reb Zalman's way.
mhm.
And that
Beautiful.
evolved over time.
Yeah. Good. That'll be a follow-up question I have for you. I have another one about those very days, because it seems to me there was a confluence. Religion without energy is desiccates, it dies, it needs to transform. How much did psychedelics play a role in opening you up to experience Shabbos? Or how much did Shabbos play a role in opening you up to psychedelics? And what was the interchange between hallucinogens, entheogens, and Jewish practice or awareness at that time in the Haight-Ashbury? I asked because there's a lot of interest in bringing psychedelics into Jewish practice today by the younger generation, 30, 40 somethings. And they're thinking a lot about it seriously. These are really educated people who are rethinking. You can go into Shabbos and feel like you're tripping, I do, without taking LSD. But I'm curious about how young people view their Shabbos experience or ecstatic Hasidish and hallucinogens in those days, and psilocybin, mushroom, LSD. Was there a confluence, a discussion of that?
Yeah, that is a very interesting thing that is showing up in Yiddishkeit and in the culture in general today. It's very strange, to those of us who were doing that 50 years ago and gave up 45 years ago. It's very strange to see it emerging today. For me, the first time I dropped acid was actually on the way back from Israel. I was in Paris and I managed to get a hold of some, and I had no idea what it was. And I wound up wandering around in the streets of Paris. I wound up at the Cathedral of Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah.
And I sat there on a bench outside the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and God showed up for me.
Yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't a Jewish God. It wasn't a Catholic God. It was just God.
Mhm.
And this was not the same God that I had been introduced to in the synagogue, in my Hebrew school class, who gave me the 10 Commandments and said, thou shalt not. This was oneness. This was a flowing oneness outside of my normal framework of how I experience. And that's what I was looking for when I wound up at the Haight-Ashbury. And that's what Shlomo opened up to me and so many others, is that we didn't really need to do acid for that. Acid was very nice. It sort of gave us a little preview of what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But what Hasidus was and what Yiddishkeit was a way of doing it without drugs. Although in the early days, I'll tell you, back when we were going to Ellie and Miriam's house in Forest Knolls, we used to drop acid.
Yeah.
On Shabbos.
Mhm.
And one time I was with Nas and Schaefer, and we were taking a little walk through the woods over there, and we found a stream, and we said, wow, a mikveh. So we take off our clothes, we go into the stream, and one of us said to the other, hey, this is a perfect place for doing some acid, right? So we're sitting in our mikveh, which was about freezing cold, and we're dropping acid, and it's Shabbos, and what could be better than that?
Beautiful.
When we started the house, Shlomo made a rule. He said, no drugs in the house. If you want to get stoned, fine, go get stoned, but not in the house. So there was one person who later became a rabbi who was staying in the house, and he was dealing drugs. And what he did is he wanted to follow Shlomo's rule, no drugs in the house. So there was a house next door that had a roof that you could reach from our second story. So he stored all his stash on the roof of the house next door. So he would follow Shlomo's rule, no drugs in the house. I think later on, the way a number of us began to see it was that, to use Aldous Huxley's phrase, drugs could open up the doors of perception.
Mhm.
But once you've got the doors of perception open, you don't need to keep opening them over and over again. They're open. Now I can do prayer, I can do Shabbos, and I'm there. why should I take a substance if I can get to the same place without it? That's how a lot of us looked at it back then.
It's, yeah, I've been talking to a lot of folks who are boomers and war babies who did it once or twice and they got opened up and it changed their practice of Yiddishkeit. It changed their prism of spirituality. So that was one of my major questions. I'm going to have just a few more. Then I'm going to ask Dan to take over some. Okay. Then how you said, you've told me over the years, the end of the house and the beginning of the Minyan, you were drifting away from Yiddishkeit a bit. What happened and how did you recover your Yiddishkeit again in the 80s? What was the course of psychological or psychic events that led you to leave Yiddishkeit and then come back?
Fair enough. Now, with the first house on Arguello Boulevard, we had hundreds of people coming through our doors, and Sufis and Buddhists and Jews and Catholics and everybody. And we were just open to the world. And at a certain point, I began to feel, okay, this is great, but it's kind of like, my image at that time was we're kind of like a big airport. People come to us and then they have all sorts of places to go. Some people would go to the Baal Tshuva world and go to Orthodox communities. Some would go other places. And I was feeling like what I was craving at that point was something which would allow us to go deeper. Maybe we could have a kind of yeshiva. Wouldn't be like the yeshivas in Lubavitch or someplace, but it would be a yeshiva where Shlomo would be the head of the yeshiva, and we could learn and we could get together. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the folks who were caring for the estate that owned the building on Arguello Boulevard, they needed to sell it. And so we had to move anyway. So I had this idea, let's have a House of Love and Prayer yeshiva. And I talked to Shlomo and talked him into being the Rosh Yeshiva. And the Kusois and the Foremans helped raise money so we could buy a house. And we bought the house on 9th Avenue. And I made Shlomo a deal. We had what I felt was a sacred promise, that if Shlomo would spend 4 months a year being with us and learning with us, then I would do whatever I can to do the rest, to find other teachers, to raise money, whatever. I just graduated from college, but I didn't know how to do any of this stuff, but I'd figure it out, I'd learn. So Shlomo and I made this deal that he would do that. The thing that I didn't understand at that point, Yonatan, was that wasn't Shlomo. Shlomo was the guy who traveled around the world and got people high and turned them on and got on the plane that night and moved on to the next town. And I was asking him to be someone that he wasn't. And it didn't work out. He couldn't be who he wasn't. He had to be who he was. But I felt overwhelmed. I felt like Shlomo hadn't kept his end of the bargain. I was strung out, stressed out. I was doing too much. I saw a lot of the Chevra. By that time, Eli and Miriam and Nawson and Zahav and Gedalia and all kinds of people, they were going to Israel. And they were going to these frum communities. They were going to yeshivas. And it wasn't me, I wasn't going to do that. And I didn't know where to go in Yiddishkeit. So I decided it was time for me. I had to be honest. I had to leave the House of Love and Prayer. It wasn't my thing anymore. And I got to have one time alone with Reb Zalman. He was in town and I was driving him to the airport. And I said, Reb Zalman, I can't have Shlomo as my Rebbe right now, but I need a Rebbe. How am I going to continue without a Rebbe? And he talked to me he said, well, maybe you don't need a Rebbe. Maybe there's a different way to do it. You don't need a Rebbe. and he was talking about how he was going to get people in the Bay Area, Claudio Naranjo, and all kinds of other people to get together to form a community of spiritual leaders. And maybe there could be a community without a single Rebbe that could just do it together. And then I dropped him off at the airport. Later on, when I became aware that the Aquarian Minyan was happening, it seemed like that was kind of an outgrowth of that vision. Maybe you don't need a Rebbe. But
Right.
for me, I needed to step back. I needed to, I'm in my mid-20s. I'm thinking I might want to have a family someday. I might want to have a profession. Maybe I need to find a profession for myself and go to graduate school and learn how to take care of myself. And maybe that's what I need to do right now. So that's kind of where I drifted.
Right. Great. Well, the impulses to create the Aquarian Minyan seem to have come in those 2 years.
Yes.
In the end of the house in 1974, and Zalman's continuing visiting, but it was percolating, it seems to me, when I've talked to folks who were active then. And Sue is here, Aryae, Libby, remember Barry Barkin, also Daniel Lev. So what I see is a percolating of the idea of collective rebbitude, which is a radical idea.
Yeah.
Really not Hasidish in a way. I was very attracted to it personally. I still am, even though I'm a rabbi. I think it's important that impulse continue, that democratization of the rabbinate is a great impulse. And you've taken that on in your own way. We don't all need to be rabbis ordained. We can function with Jewish learning and depth of spirituality without ordination. And this is the lesson of the Minyan that's taught America too. We can really rally each other at our own level without ordination. If I don't want to preach about that, speaking as a rabbi and one who was at one point very skeptical of rabbis, like many of us in this room, extremely skeptical of the rabbinate. So I want to say thank you. I have more to ask, much more, but I want to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Dan Howard, who's got a few more questions for you, and then we're going to open it up to the room. And Libby's welcome to pipe in too as well.
Hey, Libby.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi Yonatan. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Okay, I am honored and thrilled to be here with you, Aryae, and the Chevra here. So I have many questions, but we'll limit them. I wish we had 2 hours for our talk today. How did your work at the House at Love and Prayer lead to what you're doing currently and have done for well over a decade, and that is weekly Shabbat gatherings in your home, known as the Torah Circle? What was the transition there? And tell us just more about the Torah Circle today.
Well, we had the House of Love and Prayer, and maybe 150 or 200 people would show up on Shabbos, and maybe 30 or 40 of them would hang around, find places to sleep, and stay with us during the week. And we needed to do something during the week. So Elia and I were sort of pondering that. And I thought, well, okay, I'll teach a Tanya class. But what did I know about the Tanya? I knew that Shlomo came from Chabad and Reb Zalman came from Chabad. So each time before the class, I would open up an English translation of the Tanya and read the next chapter and say, okay, let's learn this chapter. But I really wasn't qualified to teach much about the Tanya, and I knew that. So I thought, okay, the only way I can make this work is let's read it together and let's have everybody share what their impressions are. And let's not pretend anything. Let's just say we're all beginners and, what do we get out of this? And I started doing that at the house, and, it was powerful. It worked. And even later on, when I was teaching stuff that I knew a little more about, I found that was a good role for me, that rather than have to be the Rebbe and be the one who knew stuff, what if I can just be the person who invites everybody to learn? And that really stayed with me for a long time. Fast forward 30 years later, for my profession, I wound up in Silicon Valley. I was doing sales, and then I wound up working with the HR community and bringing the Silicon Valley's vice presidents of human resources together to learn from each other. And I thought my job was to impart knowledge. These guys were PhD and women were PhDs, and they'd been at their job. But I thought, well, if I get some good, smart people in, they can teach stuff. And one time I tried it. We were at Sun Microsystems, and the person from Oracle and the person from Apple and all these people were there in the room, and we were trying to teach them something. And at a certain point, somebody stands up and says, I don't want to hear this crap. I want to learn from the people who are in the room. And I looked around, and I had to make a split-second decision. So I said, okay, we're going to learn from you. Why don't you learn from each other? And it worked. And I had a very successful business for 10 years. I explained to my mother, she tried to understand what I was doing. I said, well, I invite a bunch of executives into a room, and they talk to each other, and they buy the breakfast, and I sit there and learn with them. And she thought about that, and she said, well, when are you going to get a real job? And in a way, I've never had a real job. I'm very privileged to sit in a circle with people and learn from them. That's what we do in the Torah Circle. That's what we've been doing for a long time now in the Torah Circle.
I have one request for you to tell a story of back to the Shlomo days, the house days. And I think you're in Los Angeles. Shlomo has a concert, and you're walking in the rain. Will you tell that story? Will you tell that story?
Sure. Yeah. So we were in the house. This was in, I believe it was the fall of '68. And we hear from Shlomo calls, and he says, I've got a mamish got a great concert at a temple, a big Reform temple in LA. And I want to ask if all of you from the house could come down and join me. So we said, wow, this sounds like fun. So I had a big old VW van that we called the Shabbos Express. And then there was a little VW Bug. So, we drive down with the van, with the Bug, we pile in, we pick up Shlomo at the airport. It's Friday afternoon. We're driving to this temple. Most of us didn't know how to get there, except Yosefa Zarchin, if anybody remembers her. She knew how to get there. It was sort of her territory where she grew up. So anyway, we're driving along. We're watching the sun go down over the horizon, but we've still got plenty of time to make it. All of a sudden, bam! There's an accident on the freeway. A truck turns over. There's a white powder that spills on the freeway. Everything is stopped, and we're waiting and waiting. Shlomo's looking at his watch. God, we're not going to make it for Shabbos. So what are we going to do? So Shlomo says, Chevra, we got to pull off to the side of the freeway. We'll lock up the cars, and we got to walk. Walk, it's crazy. How are we going to do this? Yosefa, she sort of knew. We go down Sepulveda Boulevard, and we go here, and we go there. So we did it, and we started walking. There may be about a dozen of us. And we're walking along Sepulveda Boulevard, and then this car comes, spins around, and stops. Who is it? It's the secretary of the temple. She says, Rabbi Carlebach, people are there waiting for you. And, come on with me, jump in the car. And he sort of looks at us and said, oh, that's okay, Rabbi. We can send other cars for your friends, for your little friends here who are walking with you. And he says, no, darling, you don't understand. It's Shabbos. And she said, oh, I know that, but they're waiting for you. And he explains to her, and he says, if he got in the car and went there with her, he wouldn't be giving her the real thing. He wouldn't be giving people the real thing. The real thing is really Shabbos. So they talk for a while and they reach an agreement. She'll drive back and tell everybody to wait, and they'll serve dinner, and people who want to wait will wait, and we'll just walk. And he asks her, so how far is it, darling? And she says, 27 miles. And she looked at her odometer, and we said, hey, 27 miles. But, what are we going to do? Shlomo's going to do it, and he's as old as he is. Well, we're in our 20s. We can walk 27 miles. So we started walking. So we walk and we walk and we walk. What happens? Starts raining. So we're walking through the rain. We're singing Shlomo songs. We're just keeping ourselves going as much as we can. After a while, there's another car that pulls up. The window comes down, says, Rabbi Carlebach. He says, yeah, who's that? It turns out it's the night owl. And the night owl runs a late night call-in radio show in LA. And he's heard about this from the secretary of the temple, and he wants to interview Shlomo. So Shlomo says, fine, as long as you drive slow next to me. So he's driving slow next to him. We're all walking, and he'll ask a question. He'll stick out the mic, and Shlomo is explaining about Shabbos. And he's doing it in terms, he's saying, we spend all our lives doing, but we have one day, one sweet, beautiful, holy day where it's just about being. It's just about being. And he does it in a beautiful way, and he tells stories, and we're all, wow, this is beautiful. So this goes out over the radio in LA. He says, thank you, Rabbi Carlebach. He goes, half hour later, there's another car that pulls up. It's a bunch of college kids. They say, is this Rabbi Carlebach? And he says, yeah, who's this? I said, well, we heard about this on the radio. We want to join you. Can we join you? We're Christian, but we want to join you. So Shlomo gives them all a big hug, and he says, according to our tradition, the people who stood at Mount Sinai, they weren't just Jews, they were people from everywhere who were hungry to be in God's presence. And who knows, if we meet each other and it feels like we knew each other forever, maybe we stood next to each other at Mount Sinai. So these Christian college students, they get out of the car, they start walking with us. Pretty soon, 2 minutes later, there's another car. They want to join us too. Before we know it, we have 200 people who are walking in the rain to be together for Shabbos. We got to the temple at about 5 a.m. They had some dry clothes for us, and they had some hot drinks, and it was the most amazing Shabbos ever. And after that, how could any of us not celebrate Shabbos?
Amazing story. Thank you, Aryae. So we want to open this up to questions and comments from our community. So I'm going to put us in gallery view. And if you have a question or comment, raise your hand, please.
Abigail has her hand up.
Abigail, please. Abigail, you're muted.
It's such a pleasure and such a joy to have you here. And where I joined the story is that I was at graduate school with Aryae, and we were in a class where we had to become counseling partners of each other. And we went on doing it for years. And at one point he said to me, Abigail, I have to tell you about a new movement in Judaism. And that was my introduction. I always credit Aryae with telling me about Jewish Renewal. And I have to ask, I have to be the ghost at the feast here and ask the question that I feel has to be included. I'm really happy to hear all these things about Shlomo, because I never participated with Shlomo, and I didn't participate because I knew about his reputation with women. but I would like to invite you to say something about that aspect of your relationship with Shlomo and how it affected the House of Love and Prayer, because I have a commitment that it should always be mentioned, because I feel there is always somebody listening who we don't know, who was hurt in those days, and that it's not respectful not to mention it. So I am asking the question.
Yes, Abigail. It's wonderful to continue our dialogue, you know, that we've been talking about this for 20 years in various ways. So it's
30.
wonderful. During the time of the House of Love and Prayer, I was not available. I was not aware that he was having any kind of sexual relationship with any of the women that I knew. Later on, I found out he was with a couple of them. What I did notice is that he seemed to be drawn to attractive young women, but you know, it was sort of a minor blip at the time. When I was doing the book, and you know, from around 98 till around 2011, I was interviewing people, and I found out more about what was actually going on. And I was confronted with a very difficult choice. Do I talk about the shadow side of what was going on with Reb Shlomo's relationship with women, or do I just ignore it? I decided that my job, that what I was here to do, was to tell the story as it actually happened. I felt that was my role. And I wanted to talk about what had actually happened based on what I observed, what I heard, what people had said to me who were involved in the house. It was very difficult to do that. And partly as a result, I lost the friendship of most of the Orthodox people who had been my closest friends in the House of Love and Prayer. And that was the price I had to pay. I make it clear in the book, or it was certainly my intention, that I love Shlomo. He was a teacher to me. There was so much that he gave to the world. But he was also a very flawed human being, and he hurt people. And the way I process that is we're all flawed human beings. We can all hurt people without intending to. And that maybe if I can accept that Shlomo was who he was, maybe I can accept that I am who I am, and maybe I can forgive myself. Maybe I can forgive other people. That was my intention. You know, when you decided, Abigail, that, you know, some 20 years ago, that you would feature Holy Beggars at an Aquarian Minyan authors night, that was the beginning of a reconciliation between you and me. And there was a pathway that which we could talk about everything and renew our friendship.
You're right. You're right. Our friendship broke during the Minyan Schism, and we were on opposite sides. And it's been such a joy in my life that we're friends, good friends again. It took quite a while. It wasn't primarily about Shlomo at all, but that was when we made reconciliation.
Thank you, everyone. So a process comment. Usually we go 1 hour with these programs, sometimes an hour and a quarter, sometimes as much as 90 minutes. So Lorelei and Reb Jonathan, Aryae, how does it feel as far as
Feel it
time?
out. Let's see.
I'm good. I'm good to go. I don't know if you guys can hear me or not. I think
We
I
can.
think so.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, we can extend it through the next 15, 20 minutes or whatever, I think other people have a lot to say or ask. I know that I do, but I don't want to go before everybody else. But it's up to Aryae also, because he may have a schedule, and understanding also that people have time commitments, so they might not be able to stay. But of course, all this is being recorded. It'll be on our Facebook page and YouTube, etc. So it's up to you, Aryae, if you want to go.
I am open. Let's keep going.
Okay.
I want to invite my friend Libby Butero, who was at the house, to make a few comments.
Actually,
Lib,
can you see me?
come,
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
here, sit here.
okay.
Hi, Libby. Good to see you.
Hi, Holy Brother. The one thing I want to say is thank you to, was it Lorelei who mentioned Moshe Geller, Moshe Pesach Geller. I would also like to bring to our attention that Aisha Joy Berkey is having some very difficult medical challenges. She'll be having surgery soon. So please hold joy in your hearts. That's the comment I want to make. And I want to thank everybody for contributing, because I was at the house from, let's see, Asher was born in April of '68, right after Pesach. So a few months later. So, and for some years. And then Aquarian Minyan. And so it's very nice to be here. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Libby.
Thank you.
Questions. Lorelei has questions. A lot of you have questions, but Lorelei, let's see what you have. I would love to call on you for the next thing.
Okay. Hi. So yeah, I never knew either Shlomo or Zalman, but I know them through their Talmudim, so to speak. When I made Aliyah in 2007, I went to Jerusalem and ended up living in Nachlaot with the Shlomo Chevra. The whole scene there, of course, Moshe Geller was a big part of it. And that's where I met him, as well as Shalom Brat, his memory should be for a blessing, Judy Brat, and all of the extended Shlomo Chevra. So I learned, the Torah, the music, the Ruach, the spirit, there's a certain flavor, there's a tom to it, right? Then I came to Berkeley and became involved with the Aquarian Minyan as in the role that I'm in now, and learned Zalman's energy, which is still really hard for me to put my finger on. This is where my question is going. It's very easy for me to fully grok the Carlebach Chevra world. The Zalman influence is much more cerebral, as you described. Also, it's also just a different flavor in a sense, but yet they have a big overlap. There's a big overlap, and I think that's the middle. That overlap is where what we call Jewish renewal. So that they're both of their energies. I'd like you to comment, if you can, on the similarities and or differences that you think are key, and then what is the path of integrating these major influences that you have found? Because I think that you're an example maybe of somebody who's found a way to integrate these paths in a really holistic way. So I'll be quiet and let you speak.
Thank you, Lorelei. I can't help looking at Reb Ruvain and Yehudit speaking about integrating. Good to see you both. In response to your question, I'm thinking about this conversation that Ruvain actually moderated between Reb Shlomo and Reb Zalman at the Farbrengen that they had in Berkeley in 1994. And Ruvain asked them that question, how are you the same? How are you different? And my recollection is that Shlomo said, this was Shlomo's answer to that. He said, Reb Zalman is very wide. He reaches over the whole world. And he goes to Japan and he goes to India. And he sees that all of these traditions go to the same basic core that we have in Yiddishkeit. He says, me, I just dig deeper and deeper into the well of Yiddishkeit, and until I get to the place where it's all universal, it's all one. And he said, if God had wanted two Shlomos, he would have made two Shlomos. If he wanted two Zalmans, he would have made two Zalmans. But clearly he wanted one Shlomo and one Zalman. You know, the way it is for me is I had asked Reb Zalman in '68 when he visited the house if he could be my Rebbe too. And he said, no, Shlomo's your Rebbe. Then after Shlomo had passed away, and I was talking to Reb Zalman years later, I said, well, could you be my second Rebbe? And he explained to me how he relates to his Hasidim, okay? He's got hundreds of people who were his, at least, you know, who knows how many, who were his Hasidim. And he has every one of them on a list. And he had them and their mother's name. And he would pray during his davening for every single one of those hundreds and hundreds of people for whom he was a Rebbe. So he said he would add me to that list. So I gave him my mother's, you know, my Hebrew name, my mother's name, and so on. The way it is for me is Shlomo's my Rebbe who opened the whole thing for me. Shlomo saw in me stuff that I didn't know was in he saw more in my soul than I knew, than I could see in my soul. I was very shy. I couldn't get in front of a group of people and say 5 words. And he taught me I could do it, you know, coming from a deep place and opened Yiddishkeit to me. But if it hadn't been for Reb Zalman, I wouldn't be doing the Torah Circle today. I couldn't do it the way people in the Orthodox world do it. It just wouldn't work for me. So what I got from my Rebbe, Reb Zalman, is the very basic thing he said to me when I interviewed him for my book. He said, once you've been to the deep roots behind all the cultural stuff, once you've been to the source, nothing is the same. And what our job in Jewish Renewal is we've got to go back to the same source that our ancestors went through in the Mishkan that we've been reading about in the Torah, to the transformation of consciousness that they experienced in the technology that they had. And our job, our responsibility in Jewish Renewal is to find the ways in the technology we have today to effect that same transformation of consciousness.
You mean the spiritual technologies, yes?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. We've got the OG of that. We've got the OG spiritual technologies. We're coming to Shavuos, right? Nothing,
Yeah, you know,
nothing's more core than that.
Reb Zalman, of course, would use technology as a metaphor, right? He would say their operating system, they ran the program on their operating system. We need to run the program on our operating system, right? And that's how he was using technology. Yeah.
Sue Goldberg, you had a question.
Hi, Aryae, so good to see you. And thank you for sharing all this. I just had a couple of comments. Don't really have, this is related to Lorelai's question. Don't have a great analysis about this, but for me, I was always with Shlomo drawn to, you know, the music, the joy, all the great experiences about the people. This was the second house of Love and Prayer and Beyond. And with I didn't really understand Shlomo's teachings or get a grasp of how knowledgeable he was. He used to come, with stacks of books and teach and tell stories until after I'd been with Zalman for quite a while with the Minyan. And then I began to kind of see Shlomo as also a great teacher. And just wondered, I don't know if this was already talked about, that both Zalman and Shlomo were sent by the Chabad rabbi to go out and bring young people into Yiddishkeit, into Judaism in those days. So, and great to see you, Yehudi, and hope you're okay. So, and while I'm remembering, Aryae, I don't think you talked about when I first knew you, you were doing some kind of career counseling type thing about, I can't remember the name of it, different kinds of work. Is that correct? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, I was working for
When-
Chabad. I was working for Chabad House in Berkeley.
Yeah.
I had gone to I'd left the house. I'd gone to graduate school. Our friend from the House of Love and Prayer, Moshe Foreman, was head of psychiatry at Tri-Cities Community Mental Health Facility in Fremont. And Moshe brought me in there as kind of an intern. And back then at Chabad House in Berkeley,
it's a cool place to be.
they were taking in, yeah, it was a cool place to be. They were taking in people. And one of the residents of the house had committed suicide. And the Rabbi Chaim Drizin, had gone to Moshe Foreman and said, we need to have somebody at the house who can be a counselor, who, if people are troubled, they can talk to them so they won't jump off the roof. So Moshe said, I've got just the person for you. So he sent me over to Chabad House. And, just when I was sort of on my way out of Jewish involvement for a while, but I wound up getting hired at Chabad House. I had a little office on the roof, and my job was just to hang out and talk with people who needed somebody to talk with. And that's when I started doing career counseling. I found out that a lot of the people who were at Chabad House, they didn't have a clue about where they were going to go with their lives. Do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be a carpenter? What do I want to do? So that's kind of how I got started doing that.
Well, I brought that up because I really, my memory is not so great these days, but you did career counseling with me, not because I was connected with Chabad House. And I credit you with, you helped me decide to stay in social work and go to grad school and get my MSW degree. So thank you.
It's awesome. So you have done awesome work.
Thank you.
So I want to invite Ruvain and Yehudit to share briefly experiences of your first encounter with Shlomo and your first encounter with Aryae.
I've got laryngitis. I can't speak more than 2 sentences. So you give it over to you, Dee.
What was the question?
Just your first encounter with Shlomo and first encounter with Aryae.
Well, I remember, I'm not sure the first encounter, but Aryae and Ruvain came together. I know the Zalman Zohar workshop in the summer of July 1975. And as a consequence of some things that happened at that time, because I think it's after that workshop was over, I started inviting people to, Zalman, I think, did a private class for the Aquarian Minyan after the public class at Unitas House. And that's when Ruvain and I started really noticing each other in a new way. We knew each other, but just, developing a relationship in a deeper way. So I associate Aryae a lot with, he and Ruvain used to hang out a lot together. That's what I remember. Ruvain has some beautiful story about encountering Shlomo, but mine was really the first. I had heard a lot about him because people in the Minyan would talk about Shlomo. A lot of people knew of the House 11 prayer, pre-Minyan times, and I guess it was before we created the Minyan as such, but during the seminar in 1974 that Zalman was teaching on Tanya. He came out, and that was he used Tanya as the introduction to Hasidism and to Kabbalah for the Berkeley community. Shlomo came into town some point along there and did a concert in Berkeley, and so I was curious, and I went to hear him at the concert, and I guess I was there and he came in late. I remember looking from the side, so maybe I was even later than he was. And he was going up to everybody and talking with them. And it took him a long time to get up to the stage. And then he got up there and was playing some music and kept talking about this is the deepest of the deep, and this is so deep, and this is and I was, and I didn't believe anything he was saying. And I said, but I knew the people I really respected and really liked him. So I knew that he was teaching the next day at the House 11 prayer in San Francisco. So I decided to give him a second chance in a different kind of venue. So I went over to the house, and he was doing a learning there. I don't remember what it was about, but then I was struck with that kind of that spoke to me, and it was much more. I mean, it was like maybe 10 people there or something. It was a nice small group, and from then on I just started to go. But after that point, and now I teach Shlomo's teachings a lot on the Parsha of the week. I realize that every time he says, let's go a little deeper, or let's open up your heart a little more and stuff, it's not just a language thing. He means it. He means like there are all these levels of opening, and he used to take us from surface to depths to depths to depths of opening soul, and I really attribute to him this sense of a soul opening and a reminder that I had a soul, and a reminder of what that feels like, and a reminder of that everyone has a soul, and every soul is connected to other souls, and that level of relating to people from a deep soul space I associate with Shlomo.
Thank you, Yehudi. So, Aryae, any closing thoughts? What else should we know?
I just want to do a quick comment. Yehudi had mentioned that Ruvain and I were close. We met each other, I think, when we were both working at the Noe Valley Community Store, which was part of a movement in those days. It was kind of a Maoist socialist movement that we were going to have the people's food system in the Bay Area. And Ruvain and I went through a lot of interesting stuff that dealing with the politics going on in those days.
Right.
But anyway, you're asking me for some closing thoughts. And I have to tell you sort of quickly that, it was sort of Ruvain and then Yehudi who got me sort of over to Berkeley and to come to the Minyan for high holidays. One of the first things I noticed in the Minyan was that it wasn't just davening. People were doing Sufi dancing. People were doing meditating. The way it first hit me is, what kind of a Jewish place is this, doing Sufi dancing, doing, all these things? And it took me a while to learn what the Minyan really was and how it was really following Reb Zalman. And that I was so taken with this idea that there was really, the vision was no one rabbi, that the rabbi was everybody, was the community. It was really so remarkable and so special, and it continues to be that way. My closing thoughts, Dan, is blessings to everyone here. We all have our part. We all have our part in Jewish renewal. We all have our part in this planet right now. We're all connected so deeply to history as the Jewish people. We all get to be part of a Torah that's not a bunch of books. The Torah is conversation. It's a 3,000 plus year old conversation. We all get to be part of that. And that conversation can enlighten us, can guide us, can inform us into what we're here to do in the world right now. I want to say special blessings just to everybody who's been keeping the Aquarian Minyan going, to Abigail, to Lorelei, to Reb Yonatan, to Dan, to Ruvain and Yehudit, who did it for so long, to everybody here, that we're here for a reason, and we're here for community, and we're here to manifest God in community and in the world. And I just want to say very grateful to be connected with all of you.
Shakoach. Thank you. Yeshakoach, more power to you.
Thank you.
We're so glad.
Thank you.
What a great
Shikoah.
wonderful, wonderful Aryae. Thank you so much. I can't even thank you enough for being with us. I was going to ask you a question about words of wisdom that you might have for us at this crucial juncture as the Aquarian Minyan is facing a future that we couldn't have predicted a year ago or 2 years ago. And I think you just basically answered it in your blessing. So thank you for reading our mind. And I'm going to